Just a few thousand years ago, the Persian Gulf looked like this, the Sahara Desert was the Sahara Savanna, and the Black Sea might not have looked the way it does today. We're all used to the face of the Earth changing over millions of years. But this is well after the end of the last ice age, and way too recently for the continents to have moved that much. In fact, this is when humans were not only around, but were already farming and building cities. So how different did the world look when humans were building the first cities and scribbling down the first written words? How did things change so quickly? And how exactly did they affect the course of human civilization? This is the city of Ur, in the south of what is now Iraq. Today, it's just a bunch of ruins near the inland city of Nasiriyah, but when it was first being built 6,000 years ago, it was a bustling city right on the coast of the Persian Gulf. There's something interesting that we notice when we go back even further to the Ice Age. Or actually, people prefer to call it the last glacial maximum since we're technically still in an Ice Age, but Ice Ages come in cycles. Anyway, during this time, with much more of the world's water locked away as ice, sea levels were as much as 130 meters lower than they are today. So if we look at the Persian Gulf, sure, we find Persia, but we don't find a gulf, as the Gulf would only begin to form after Pennsylvania no longer looked like Greenland. So in a sense, what happened here is that the Gulf went from not existing to going all the way this far inland, and has been gradually pulling back ever since, which as an American who grew up in the 2000s kind of feels like a political metaphor, but I digress. And the key here are the rivers that gave Mesopotamia its name, and its existence. You see, as rivers reach their end at the sea, there's a very sudden transition from fast-flowing river water to relatively slow ocean water. Add to that all the silt and sediments that got washed up by the rivers hundreds of kilometers ago, and all that material essentially just falls down to the bottom just after the river's mouth. You can see this all around the world in places like the Nile River Delta or the spindly parts of Louisiana, but in Iraq it becomes particularly obvious, at least when looking at a side-by-side comparison. Silt deposits have changed far more coastlines than just this one, of course. It's also the reason why Rome can no longer use its ancient port in Ostia, why the passage at Thermopylae was a lot narrower when a certain battle was fought there in 480 BC, and why Ephesus kept moving westward century by century, at least until the Ottomans came across it and decided, screw it, leaving the city as arguably one of the best preserved Roman cities out there. I suppose the Persian Gulf being a bit longer isn't really the most dramatic difference on a world map though, so how about something a bit more noticeable? These are the cave paintings of Tassadi Najer, with giraffes and oxen and people interacting with these animals. These paintings can be found right here, in southern Algeria, in the middle of the largest hot desert on the planet. But a few thousand years ago, the place whose name is literally just the Arabic word for desert might not have been a desert. The really interesting thing here is, the Sahara was still a desert during the last glacial maximum, only turning green during the 9th millennium BC, before turning back into a desert by the 4th millennium BC. Now, in human terms, that's the beginning of writing to the construction of the International Space Station, but in geological terms, that's less than nothing. What's going on here are something called Milankovitch cycles, named after Milutin Milankovic, but spelled differently for the poor English speakers who wouldn't know what to do with that C. These are essentially cycles of how much sunlight hits the Earth's surface, mainly during the Northern Hemisphere summer. Earth is tilted by around 23.5 degrees, which is how we have seasons, but Earth doesn't exist in a vacuum. Okay, actually it literally does, but not in a metaphorical one, as the sun, the moon, the other planets, even a rock out in the Kuiper Belt will tug and pull on everything else, very slightly changing how far Earth orbits the sun and how much it's tilted. Technically there are actually 3 Milankovitch cycles, hence why everyone says it in the plural, one for how close and how far Earth gets from the sun and when exactly it reaches these closest and farthest points, one for how far Earth is tilted, and one for how much Earth wobbles on its axis. It's never by much, of course, but when it comes to sustaining life on a planet, even the smallest tweaks can mean the difference between a green Sahara and a Saharan Sahara. If you want to learn more about this, I'd highly recommend this video from It's Just Astronomical. Okay, not right now though, I'll put it in a pinned comment down below for you to click on later. This brought about a period known as the African Humid Period, which is kind of exactly what it sounds like. Today, Earth comes closest to the Sun just after New Year's, but 10,000 years ago, Earth reached its perihelion during the Northern Hemisphere summer, meaning the Northern Hemisphere was receiving more sunlight during the summer. Now, at first, more sunlight sounds like the last thing the Sahara needs, but this also strengthened the monsoon winds, bringing more rain to northern Africa. By the way, if you've heard of those sites in Egypt and Libya where people have found whale skeletons, that's actually a completely different thing from when this part of the world was under the Tethys Ocean, which closed up around 20 million years ago, or about 3,000 times further back than we're actually looking right now. Now, when I say green, don't imagine vast fertile plains so much as a giant savanna. This savanna would have also been dotted with several giant lakes, including Lake Megachad, where different pastoral and agricultural peoples lived, domesticated sheep, cattle, and goats, and buried their dead along the shores of lakes that now no longer exist. Then, around 3000 BC, these same Milankovitch cycles changed the Earth's climate yet again, moving the rains further down in Africa. Some newer studies actually suggest this happened over the course of just 100 to 200 years, which I can only imagine must have been terrifying for the generations that lived through this. This was also around the time ancient Egypt was starting to become a thing, at least in the way we recognize today, which might be related to the Sahara's desertification, but this effect between humans and the climate might have also gone both ways, in that grazing animals everywhere may have created a dust bowl, exacerbating everything going on and helping turn the Sahara back into a desert in such a short time frame. It does make me wonder what kind of Stone Age climate change deniers there must have been though. Now, part of me feels a bit weird citing a Reddit comment, but this comment here does actually explain everything pretty well, and with sources, I might add. I'll just let it scroll past for a second so you can read it here in case the original one ever gets deleted. Okay, let's move onward. Finally, let's take a look at the Black Sea, and something known as the Black Sea Deluge Hypothesis. This can be a bit of a controversial one though, for reasons I promise I will spill the tea on, which you may be able to tell in how they use the word hypothesis and not theory, which in this case is basically science talk for, look, maybe this thing is real, but we haven't actually proven it to our satisfaction, and a lot of people have made good arguments against it. We're working on it. Today, the Black Sea, which is actually blue, is just another part of the wider Mediterranean Sea, albeit one just barely connected by two straits, known as the Bosporus and the Dardanelles. These straits are only about 100 meters at their deepest, but during the last glacial maximum, with much of the world's water locked away as ice, and sea levels being as much as 130 meters lower than they are today, this would have severed the connection between the Mediterranean and the Black Lake? To summarize what people believe might have happened, the Black Sea did still exist as a body of water, but as a smaller, semi-freshwater lake, sometimes called the Neo-Euxinian Lake, from the Old Greek name for the sea, Evxinos Pontos, or the Hospitable Sea. Then the ice melted and sea levels slowly rose over the next 6,000 years, until the salty Mediterranean water breached the walls and catastrophically flooded the entire area. Or maybe it was actually more of a slow gradual trickle than a sudden deluge. Deluge? I've never actually heard that word pronounced in my dialect. I can only remember hearing British people say it. In fact, some argue that, while the Black Sea was smaller, it was never actually disconnected from the Mediterranean in the first place. You can see the vast difference in opinion here. Whether you go with the popular deluge hypothesis, the gradual inflow model, or even the Caspian Sea inflow model, that's still up to the geologists and hydrologists to figure out, and this is a distinctly social studies channel. Different dates have been put forward for when this event happened, from the original paper's 5600 BC to a revised 6800 BC, to some suggesting as far back as 12,000 BC, but most hypotheses tend to go more recently. Of course, with the time frame we're talking about, many have also tried to link this story to one of the great flood myths of human history, like the biblical Noah, who was tasked with building an ark to save his family and all the animals from a great flood, or the Mesopotamian Utnapishtim, who built a great ship to save his family, the craftsmen from his village, and baby animals from a great flood, or the Greek Deucalion, who, with the help of his father Prometheus, built a chest so that he and his wife could survive a great flood. However, no one has actually found any human ruins or artifacts from the parts of the Black Sea that were once above water. Whether or not these stories were based on real prehistoric events, though, isn't even the question we're asking here. And that's not even the question the scientists here are necessarily trying to answer. Obviously, I have my own beliefs, or lack thereof, but stories like these mean a lot to a lot of people. What I find really interesting here, though, is the story of the stories themselves and how they interlink with each other, which I might make another video about in the future if people are interested. I really enjoy looking into subjects like this because when it comes to historical timescales, you can think of it in the human history timescale and the Earth history timescale, but they never seem to go into each other. I don't know if I'm the only one who ever does this, but sometimes I'll think of something through the first lens and think, whoa, 5,000 years ago, that's old. And then think of something through the second lens and go, wow, 5 million years ago, that's recent. It's kind of like turning feet into miles, ignoring metric for a minute. Like, 1 mile is 5,280 feet, but after a while, they just don't compute together. And maybe that does a disservice to just how long the history of this world really is. Although that's probably just because of how bad human brains are at truly understanding large numbers. Probably because we never needed that ability to survive.